Hello YouTube. I want to talk today about disappearance of people without any explanation and often without a trace. I believe that statistics would show that every year even such developed countries of Europe as the United Kingdom, France, Italy, 10 to 20,000 people disappear without a trace. Well, in 1991, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the USSR published similar data. At that time, more than 80,000 people disappeared. And you know what? The Interior Ministry and the KGB had at least some information, only about 60,000 of them. The rest disappeared. Every year, a significant number of people disappear in Russia. The scale of such incidents speaks to the great problem of the mysterious disappearance of members of the Russian society. Now, police statistics show that several tens of thousands of people have been missing in just 1 year. It is possible to find, as a rule, a small part of the missing among the living or the dead. There is a certain tendency to increase the number of people who disappear in some mysterious way. Their disappearance defies explanation and causes a lot of unnecessary misinterpretations. In some situations, they disappear in the presence of other people who witness such event. Well, there are certain places that are popularly called lost sites or areas, or detrimental areas, and such sites are associated in the memory of people with bad events. They are located in many countries, not just in Russia, of course, and there are places with a bad reputation. And knowledge is passed on for many years and centuries about such places. And people remember if there are unusual events that occur there with frightening regularity at certain intervals of time. People remember. Let's look at an example from the Russian history as to what took place in the 15th century in the land of Altai, that's in Russian Asia. Eyewitnesses told how before their eyes a large army that the local warlord had gathered to fight the invaders who attacked their territory and devastated the villages. Well, this large army disappeared without a trace. The battle took place at the Sarlik mountain, and here the reason for the disappearance of people was also a thick fog that covered this army at the beginning of the battle. But the troops were never found. They were gone. People mysteriously disappeared at different times. There is a lot of evidence. For example, from the 17th century Russian chronicles, we know how the monk Kirill disappeared during a meal in the monastery. And then it was believed that this was done by evil spirits. Allegedly, a person who is guilty of something is dragged away by the devil for punishment in the underworld. In the 20th century, most scientists who were interested in mysterious disappearances of people, well, they decided that such abductions are organized by extraterrestrial civilizations. I want to add that some of the scientists, not most, but at least a number of them had this idea. Other theories of scientists, they talk about parallel worlds that open up their doors, capturing a piece of our world. These are unpredictable and dangerous phenomena. It is not clear how this absorption occurs and whether it threatens the Earth's inhabitants with a global transition to a parallel reality that scares us with its unknown qualities. Let's look at some cases. One of the mysterious cases occurred in the city of Nizhny Tagil aboard public transportation back in 1972. People traveling on the bus witnessed how suddenly a young man disappeared before their eyes. The passengers of the bus, which was only somewhat full, suddenly saw that in an instant a person among them vanished. They noticed him and his companion even before this mysterious disappearance, because he was standing with a woman at the end of the bus and arguing with her. As it turned out, it was a married couple, and they spoke in raised tones. Eyewitnesses said that the man was holding a small metal pipe. Outside of the bus, it was raining, accompanied by a heavy thunderstorm. Suddenly the bus, or a place near it, was hit by lightning, which caused a small crackling sound inside it, as a result probably of the electrical discharge. Witnesses to the incident said that the young man next to his wife instantly disappeared, and the pipe that he was holding, well, it rolled between the seats. The wife, who was next to her missing husband, later spoke of feeling very cold at the moment when he suddenly was no longer near her. A similar story was observed on the Lake Baikal 20 years after the previous incident. So what we're looking at, 1992. There were tourists around the lake. There were enough of them, and many of them would confirm this unusual case. According to their testimonies, the sky instantly darkened at some point, and a solid fog spread over the water, which was getting closer to the people resting on the shore. Those who were in the water ran out of it, except for a man of about 40 years of age. Apparently interested in this phenomenon, he moved towards the fog. Eyewitnesses said that in an instant the man was covered with fog, which subsided a second later. It all happened very quickly. The man in the water simply disappeared, vanished. They searched for him for some time after the sad event, but they couldn't find the man. Vacationers who were then on the shore for a long time, they remembered this story, and many of them were afraid to swim in that place where he disappeared. But I also urge you to look in my channel for those videos about this magnificent and mysterious lake and other paranormal phenomena pertaining to strange fog attacking Soviet military outposts at the lake, and of course the underwater humanoids of Lake Baikal that I and my co-author and colleague Philip Mantle made internationally famous because of our research in books. It's a fascinating story, and we're onto something. But let's look at the very interesting period of Gorbachev's perestroika policies, when the Soviet Union was changing and so much information came out because freedom for the first time in so many years was becoming in fashion in Russia, in the Soviet Union. These facts were either published in the Soviet press, media in those years, or were taken from the operational work of the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena, part of the Geographical Society of the USSR, and in my previous, of course, videos you can find other episodes that were covered by this commission. Very interesting. Well, the first story dates to the World War II. Two partisans or guerrilla fighters from the detachment of Dmitry Medvedev, a well-known guerrilla leader in the Soviet Union at the time. Well, they were stationed at the edge of the forest and watched the German headquarters located in one of the remote villages around Smolensk. One of them decided to do something, to put back his food cloth, and at the same time to take a smoke. Well, he put aside his rifle, took up his boot, while his companion was redoubling his vigilance. After a few seconds, well, the first guerrilla fighter turned to his friend with a question, but did not hear an answer. Looking back, the guerrilla fighter was horrified to find that his partner had vanished without a trace. Right there. His bag, his food, his rifle, everything was there. But there was no sound, and nobody alerted the other guerrilla fighter. And then there is another story. The following case was told by a doctor of technical sciences, Dmitriev. And he recalls that when a father and son went to the mountains one time, and the father, well, he walked away from the parking lot for a while, and when he returned, the son seemed to have disappeared through the ground. and the tracks in the snow show that he did not go anywhere, and no one approached him. He was there and he was gone, and nothing in the snow would show that anybody stepped into it. Dmitriev suggests that this man, well, that the boy who disappeared was incinerated by a powerful ball lightning. But there was not even any ash left in this place. Another similar case also occurred in the winter at a campsite near Kirov. It was only an hour before lunch, but one of the girls decided to take a walk in the woods through the newly fallen snow. Her friend shouted for her to wait and started putting out his skis. The girl, laughing, shouted, "Catch up with me!" and she disappeared into the trees. A few minutes later, the friend accepted this challenge and began to catch up. But half a kilometer from the campsite, the girl's skis run suddenly ended, and there were no other footprints nearby, in the newly fallen snow. Just like that. No more prints, no more, nothing in the snow, and the person disappears. It is worth mentioning several cases from the book of the famous Russian writer, researcher of the paranormal too. And the book was called Secret Power, Invisible Force. Sometimes people disappeared suddenly, without a trace and inexplicably. I mean those situations that cannot be explained in any way. The paralyzed old man who was taken out by relatives in a chair and left alone at the door of the house for a couple of minutes, and he disappeared. The only thing left in the empty chair was a blanket that covered him. In the last century, that would be in the 19th century, an employee of the British Foreign Office disappeared in the deserted street in Berlin in front of his servant. He was about to get into the harness carriage, but at the last minute, having decided to check the harness, he went to the horse. A second later, he was gone. Just before our eyes, so to say, a young man disappeared on the outskirts of Glasgow in the early hours of New Year's morning in 1966. The three brothers were walking along the road on their way to pay a holiday visit to the relatives. They were talking about something and found out that the youngest, Alex, was not with them and gone. Here's another case that occurred in Moscow. The man was visited by friends at work. He ran out of cigarettes and, throwing on his jacket, and all he had besides that was just his slippers. He went out to the grocery store in the same building. Well, we waited for him in vain, but he never returned. Disappeared in broad daylight in a space of several dozens of meters. There are also cases of double disappearances, although they are separated in time. For example, winter of 1984, a large group of Kaluga traffic policemen, on non-working days, decided to hunt wild boar. The hunters walked through the winter forest like in a chain formation, in direct sight of each other, so that the boar would not pass between them. But when they approached the place where the boar was supposed to be, they found neither prey nor any of the hunters. Well, nothing turned out after the search. There were other cases. For example, there was a man who disappeared, and his companions who were close to him, all they saw was a red flash in the direction, and they decided that a cigarette was lit, but it was not the case. And what happened was that the next day the soldiers from the nearest military unit were sent to search for the missing man, but to no avail. A few months later, in the late spring, one of the soldiers of this unit who participated in the search went on a leave. He told his friends that he wanted to see the place where the traffic police officer disappeared in the winter. He did not return to the unit, did not arrive home either, and this soldier was only a short time away from being discharged. I mean, I've known stories and have seen some in the Soviet Union of runaway soldiers, but this was something else. This was the case where first the traffic policeman disappeared in front of the people, and then a soldier who went looking for him. There was another case in Karelia in 1987. A biologist disappeared from a small island. All his belongings and the boat remained in place. A few months later, his brother disappeared in Leningrad, just as inexplicably. And only once, if you believe the witness of the phenomenon of disappearance that was able to observe the very phase of the phenomenon, only one in one of all these cases, somebody who actually observed the act of disappearance. And you know what, people don't like to talk about it. I'm sure there were more cases. People prefer not to reveal or not to talk about it too much. There was a very interesting case in the Caucasus Mountains back in 1980. Two mountaineering friends who were vacationing at a campsite in the Azov Glade decided to walk to Elbrus Mountain without informing anyone. On the cable car they got to the station Mir, and this was at the altitude of 3,500 meters, and there were only 2 kilometers left to get to the top. Well, but they were not going to conquer the mountain. Their goal was the so-called Shelter of the 11, where according to their information, friends from Leningrad were supposed to be. But only one of them, with a graying head, made it to the shelter. He told an incredible story. Just 300 meters below the shelter, when they already saw other people standing near the aluminum barrel-like house, he looked back at his comrade who was a little bit behind, and before his eyes the man suddenly began to bend into a sinusoid, then thin out and rapidly stretch up. After a split second, everything disappeared, of course, and the mountain climbers rushed to search, but the specified place where it was supposed to have happened, well, they found there only an ice axe stuck in the dense snow, and there was nowhere for a person to disappear in this place on that mountain. Again, Garbovsky, Russian author Garbovsky, with whom I corresponded years ago and who passed away in London in 2003, he tried to give such cases the following explanation. In linking the facts of such sudden and unexplained disappearances and cases of spontaneous displacement, I am certainly making an assumption. This assumption assumes that during uncontrolled teleportation, a person who disappeared in one place can appear anywhere, in the Arctic ice, in the depths of the ocean, in other dimensions of worlds or other worlds. In this case, we can only state that the first act of the drama, the very disappearance of a person, the list of such disappearances occurring all over the world and in our country is large and constantly updated. Well, Soviet police had revealed very interesting facts during the perestroika years under Gorbachev's leadership of the country. It turns out that in the police, well, cases of missing people are considered the most unpleasant. There is almost no chance of solving them, and police do like to solve cases. You can divide such cases in several categories. First, people who for some reason have decided to give up their past lifestyle and leave their family and friends or escape from law enforcement agencies. Second, victims of so-called domestic violence. They are usually the children or wives of the family despots. They run far away, planning their disappearance in advance. And third, people who suffer from mental illnesses and memory loss. This is susceptible to the disease also called wanderlust, or less poetically vagrancy, or elderly people who have fallen into insanity. It happens that the missing become a victim of robbers, rapists, or maniacs. Such, as a rule, they're still found, although rarely alive, and their identification requires labor and time. But among all these cases, those that do not fall into any categories that I mentioned, those cases stand out and suggest that there is an intervention of higher forces, or as some people say, extraterrestrial intelligence. And for example, here are several such cases. Once the parents of a certain Sergei Sosnovsky filed a report to the police department about the disappearance of their son under very strange circumstances. He came to see the district therapist at the clinic, who told him to undress and lie down on the couch, and went to the next room to get medical devices, tools, and when he returned, the patient was not there. It was as if he had fallen to the ground. His clothes still were hanging on the chair. Sosnovsky was never found, and they looked for him. There was another case. There was a student, Lena Dyatlova, in the same town of Klin, who got on a city bus late at night and was, according to the driver, the only passenger aboard. The bus went without, it wouldn't stop, it kept driving, and when the final destination, the final bus station they arrived at, the doors opened and the girl was not in the cabin. Where she disappeared to remained a mystery. Of course, there was investigation. But the case was considered one of the so-called dead-end cases for many years. Well, let's look at more recent one. For example, the disappearance of a retired person, Vasily, at the site of the Chelyabinsk meteorite fall on the infamous lake Chebarkul. According to his nephew, just 3 days after the event, when the meteorite was arrived in the area, well, 3 days after that event that stirred up the whole world, Uncle Vasily, who does not believe in any magic, paranormal, and even more so in UFOs, well, he was an avid fisherman. He took his fishing rods and a folding chair and a table and placed them on ice and disappeared into the water. Although it was difficult to get into the water, the ice was so thick that it is very difficult to break through, except for a small hole. Near such a small hole, they found all the gear, untouched bait, a thermos of hot tea, and even the same table and chair. But the man was not there. It is often said that Earthlings are abducted by extraterrestrials for some purposes that only the extraterrestrials can understand. However, there are many who are willing to tell you how they visited a flying saucer, what they did there, and how they got back to Earth. But of course, there is no proof that the events ever took place. And I have an interesting video about famous Russian politician and a famous chess player, Kirsan Ilumzhinov, how he disappeared. And he talked about it. Still talks. Well, people also, those who had been kidnapped or abducted, they also talk about time corridors, where a person gets into a curved space-time continuum, where the seconds are equal to Earth years. But who really knows where he or she has vanished to, where they got to, what strange places and times? And this is one of the subjects that interests a lot of people around the world, because it happens probably on a daily basis. Of course, people continuously disappear in Russia too, and as they do in other countries every year. Someday I will bring you more cases to your attention, because I'm always asked questions about paranormal time incidents and disappearances, and I will bring it up again, this subject. I ask that you please subscribe to my channel, please share it, and if you can support my research, please see the information in the introduction to this video. I hope to bring you more videos soon on different subjects pertaining to Eurasian paranormal. And as always, I thank you for your attention and time.